Hi, my name is Jessica Gutknecht. I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Department of Soil, Water, and Climate. Wherever you are out there in virtual land, thanks for listening in on our talk entitled How Management for Soil Health Conveys Adaptation to Extreme Weather Events. Well, a lot of us listening to this think a lot about soil health as a path to sustainable agriculture. And we're really interested in the fact that healthy soils have many benefits, including retaining nutrients, holding water, reducing erosion, reducing compaction, and sustaining yields. What I specifically am also interested in is the idea that healthy soils also improve climate adaptation. This is a recent meta-analysis where they examined yield volatility, how sensitive are corn yields to rising temperatures across many counties in several Midwestern states. And they found these large geographical differences. In a deeper dive as to why, they explored all of these different factors, and what they found was that the ability of the soil to retain moisture, either through clay content, plasticity, or water holding capacity, was one of the number one indicators reducing yield volatility, increasing yield stability in the face of climate warming. And when we go back to some of these soils with really low yield volatilities, they are the beautiful soils as we have in Minnesota with a lot higher water holding capacity. So here's this direct link between soil health, soil quality, and climate adaptation. In Minnesota, climate is also getting wetter with more big events. And so in the context of a lot of this is that not only is our climate warming at a very quick rate, but we're getting wetter. And this is another recent study showing these positive trends of the increased flood magnitudes and really big events that we're seeing in Minnesota. And this is especially important for states like Minnesota, where we are a top 10 ag producer in the US. And so when we have damage from flooding in our agricultural lands, it's a huge economic hit in our state. But before I dive into what we did, I want to take one more minute to think about what is soil health in the first place. We know we can measure many, many aspects of soil, chemical and physical and biological properties. We also know that in different contexts, we have soil-related but value-related outcomes that we're interested in. When I talk about yield or climate adaptation or clean water, those are outcomes I want to see, not necessarily the measurements I want to take. And this goes back to this first slide that I showed. Again, holding water, retaining nutrients, adaptation, reducing compaction. These are all things I want to see. And so I would argue then that a healthy soil is similar to human health. Does it have the outcomes I aim for? Each of us listening to this talk has a different status of our own health, maybe different health goals, or ways that we want to improve our health or maintain our health. And I would purport that soil health is the same thing. We might have different goals. A given farm might have different goals. And we want it to have the outcomes that we aim for. So I would argue that we start there. What is the outcome that we want on this piece of land? And then how do I measure the soil to understand what has led to those outcomes, or how I can manage better for those outcomes? So in this study, with those things in mind, what we asked was how effective is incentivized through the EQUIP program, cover cropping and reduced tillage for changing soil characteristics? Do outcomes hold across a geographical region? Is combined cover cropping and reduced tillage a viable strategy for climate adaptation, water quality outcomes, and this kind of definition of soil health? So most of what I'm going to do today is talk to you about a study and march you through a lot of the indicators, and then get back to this question of climate adaptation. The specifics of how we did this is that I worked closely with the NRCS where we sampled 25 farms that were enrolled from 1 to 3 years in their soil health initiative, which was an incentivized equip program for planting diverse cover crops and some amount of reduced tillage. This was a paired design, so at each of these 25 sites, we had 2 fields, one that was in the program and one that was not in the program. We had 16 soil types across these farms. We did a wide array of field and lab assessments of physical, chemical, and biological properties. And we also did some surveys to explore the management at each of these farms. Here is a big listing of the measurements performed. I'll show data from a lot of these, but not all of them today. We had several physical components, several chemical components, and several biological components. And to get at this climate adaptation question, we then went back to 6 of those 25 farms and simulated a 50-year storm. I used the NOAA Atlas 14 database online and did a specific 50-year storm at each of our locations, which was roughly 4 inches of rain in 2 hours. And we measured the flow through, the sediment, the dissolved organic carbon, the phosphorus load, and the nitrate load in that surface runoff. And in the upper corner here, you see a picture of the setup. It's not exactly sophisticated, but I basically had this sprinkler that I would move around to make sure I was getting, coverage across this 0.5 by 0.5 meter runoff plot that I then captured that runoff into this 5-gallon bucket. And so what did we find? And the answer really lies in these 2 pictures. We saw a lot of variance. We had some farms and some results that were very clearly different. As you see in the bigger picture here where, late in the season, there was lots and lots of growth of these diverse cover crops paired with a farm that had recently been tilled, versus the other picture I have here where, after a year or 2, the farmer decided to put all of his land into no tillage and so had, some weed pressure emerging, but also was doing a lot of really interesting, innovative things on this farm. And so we just saw this huge array of things, and we're just starting to tackle the nuance of some of the patterns that we're seeing. Now, put this in terms of data. Here's a first plot where I have all the farms along the bottom with 2 of our indicators, the percent water stable macro aggregates, which is the largest aggregate size class, or the infiltration rate. In blue is the non-cover cropped field at each site, and the green is the cover cropped field in each site. And if you glance across these, you'll start to see this variance I'm talking about, where at some of our farms we see these positive gains where we have this cover cropping and reduced tillage. And at some farms we don't. But looking at this graph, you can maybe start to feel what we've been feeling, that this is just a lot of data to grapple with, and this is only 2 of those many, many things that we measured. And so what we're doing to start to condense that data is called an effect size approach. And for those of you who are not familiar with this type of approach, I have one slide here where I'm going to walk you through what we did. Again, here's our percent water stable aggregates, one farm where we would have the mean of the cover cropped and not cover cropped fields. We then would use those means to calculate a log response ratio. And this gives us one value per farm to ask, was there a positive or negative change or 0 response? And then if you look across to the right on this slide, you can see the way that I'm going to be showing these figures. So we can easily compare across all of our farms and indicators. The box plot here represents a 90% confidence interval of our data. And then we have numbers that are representing each of our farms. So now let's start to look at some data. Here are our physical indicators. And you can see that across a lot of our indicators, we didn't see much actually. And as you go across, you can see that, in this case with these physical indicators, where we're seeing the biggest gains is actually with our soil aggregation. And You also can see that some of the farms jump out. And, these are aggregates from the same farms, but for example, Farm 106, Farm 35, Farm 87 are all showing this positive indication. And I'm going to zoom in now to look at some of these indicators where we also saw some positive gains from the penetrometer of how easily we can push into that soil. Again, the positive gains of these mega and micro aggregates, and then paired with this, where we're actually not seeing a huge difference in our bulk density. So some measurements are yielding a lot of response and some are not. Then if we look to some of our CNN indicators, we also did not see, huge changes in most of these indicators, either be it the total soil organic matter, the total carbon or nitrogen, either at the surface or deeper in the soil, or these Solvita tests to look at this kind of burst respiration. We're not seeing a lot of change, a little bit with our deeper soil carbon, but in general, we're not seeing a lot of change from these indicators. And then if we look at a summary of some of our indicators where we're seeing, more of the positive gains, here I have added the infiltration rates, and just to point out some of the interesting farms. So this Farm 35, Farm 82, and you can barely see Farm 103 again, as some of our farms or site pairs where we're seeing bigger responses. The earthworm counts was another place that we saw a lot more significant positive responses. Now we turn back to this bigger question, this value that I would like to see as an outcome of soil health. Does management for soil health protect against a 50-year storm? And our answer is largely the same. Sometimes. And it's not necessarily always on the same farms that we had other positive infiltration or aggregation benefits. Here I want to make a note that we are looking at this figure in the opposite way. So the benefit would be that we would have a reduction in sediment, a reduction in phosphorus or total carbon or total nitrogen. And so now what we want to see are any farms that are below zero instead of above zero. For example, Farm 103, where we saw some positive benefits of soil health, we're actually seeing that there are higher levels of phosphorus or carbon or nitrogen in the runoff after this simulated 50-year storm. And we see some other farms, such as Farm 30, where we indeed are seeing some really nice reductions in these sediment or nutrient loads when we're managing for soil health. Again, reiterating that, sometimes we're seeing that even after a couple of years, we do protect against a 50-year storm when we manage for soil health. And so in summary, management for soil health through the use of diverse cover crops improves soil on some farms. Management for soil health also improves adaptation to climate change on some farms. And what some of this variance suggests is that, we have a lot more digging to do in this data, but also what this suggests is that we still, need to think about tailoring management strategies for the soil health need to specific situations or desired outcomes, and perhaps that local support networks are needed because this similar approach on many farms didn't always yield the same outcomes. Looking forward, I actually want to point out that, this was only 1 to 3 years with cover cropping, and so it's actually really exciting that we're seeing something, and this idea that, cover cropping could be a valuable solution in our toolbox. Infiltration, aggregation, earthworm count seem to be the most quickly changing soil health indicators. And looking forward, we're planning to do a deeper dive into why some farms saw large differences and some didn't. With that, I'll say thank you to my lab and to our collaborators. This is one of our farmer cooperators, and I love showing this picture of kind of the real life behind some of these things that I was doing these rainfall simulations out the same year that I was pregnant with my second son. So with that, I look forward to hearing your questions from this talk. Feel free to reach out.